Welcome, everybody, to another live episode of Event Marketing Redefined. I'm your host, Matt Kleinrock, CEO of Rockway Exhibits and Events. Awesome show today. I got two awesome people to come back. I can't believe they've done this twice now. Both Erin and Bethany did an individual show each, and now I've brought them back for a little bit of a panel discussion. So first, we have Erin McElroy. She's the program director at IBM. Program director, I believe it's executive events and event experience, correct, Erin?
That's right.
Awesome. Nailed it. Bethany is the senior director of events at Sixth Sense. Erin and Bethany, welcome both of you guys. Thank you so much for doing this today.
Thanks for having us. Looking forward to it.
Of course. So cool conversation today. The main focus of this is this idea that event marketers are constantly asked to do more with less. Like I could already hear people laughing on the side because it is such a common thread in the event world. And if you're an event marketer, if you're an event planner, if you're on the agency, supplier, builder, whatever side you're on, you understand this dilemma, right? I've done some good thinking on this, and I actually wrote a LinkedIn post the other day where, as I thought about it more, I understand that doing more with less sometimes comes with a negative connotation, right? People think cutbacks in an organization, people think that resources are taken away, and people think that budgets are going to get slashed out of nowhere. All of those three things do happen, and they suck, right? But I think the way we're framing this conversation is how to do more with less and essentially getting creative, being strategic, and ways of viewing challenges is how we want to sort of frame this conversation, because I think a lot of people are doing that. The post I wrote on LinkedIn was kind of changing your mindset and making it a practice, not just when you're asked or not just when things go wrong. But if you think about it, like we're all pretty wasteful at times. We all get used to doing things a certain way. So retraining our brain to say, how do we do more with less? No matter what it is that you do is just a great practice to get into. So with that, I want to know, Erin, let's start with you. What is doing more with less? What does that mean? What does that look like to you right now?
This is kind of a way of working that I've been doing for the last 10 years in trying to drive innovation into how we create experiences at IBM. And, what it means today is we're being squeezed even more. But I think that it really is working smarter, more creatively, taking a fresh look at things, being forced into that in some ways, which we all are. And I think it is a ripe opportunity to innovate. And that's a number of different things in terms of what type of venue, how you show up, who you're working with, what investments you make in certain things. Are there ways to trade with partners that have similar mission? So it really opens up a lot of different things that when we have a budget that we're used to, you just go right into it and you kind of do what you did before and maybe tweak it. Here, we're looking at ways that we really have to revolutionize how we approach our strategies. So
love a lot of what you said there. Bethany, what about you? What is doing more with less for you look like right now?
I think for us, it's really focusing on maximizing ROI, right? Like a focus on quantity over quality and getting not only butts in seats, but the right butts in the seats, right? And targeting and spending your money on the right people. And that's super important as budgets are cut.
I love that you said the butts in the seats. So Pablo, who everybody knows, is going to love that because we did a presentation at Exhibitor Live and we talked about how to get butts in seats. And I had to pull the reins back on Pablo how many times he said butts in the presentation, right? So, all right. So let's get back. Two things. One each that you had said that I wrote down that I really, really like when it comes to doing more with less. One, Erin, you touched on partnering, right? So I think this is a little bit of a strategy, a little bit of an approach, like a mindset that you go to when you're asked to do that. Can you give us like a little bit of a breakdown on that? Just your thoughts.
Sure. I'll give you an example of how we did this last year. We wanted to have a presence at Cannes Lions, and if anyone has ever done that, the Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity, it's where the elite and the celebrities go and the top CMOs in the world. And you can't really step foot there without spending millions of dollars. And we'd come at it kind of late, and so we looked at, okay, we know we don't have the budget at all to put towards this, especially a couple months before. So we started looking at partners. Who do we know who's going to be there? that we do business with that has a similar mission to us, a similar message. And so we had a very small sponsorship that gave us a stage. And then through that, we said, okay, now with this, for this very small investment, we have, and this is very, I'd say probably about 2% of what a typical IBM event budget is. Okay. For one of the most expensive places to show up. We basically said, okay, we have these sessions. What do we have to work with now? Let's go see what partners also want to tell this similar message. And so they then gave us access to their stage as we gave them access to our stage. And so the butts and seats that we were able to reach just continued to exponentially grow. And we had 4 major partners. And so now all of a sudden, we're not just in the one venue that we're sponsoring, but because we really didn't have those dollars to buy those extra activations, we traded, and for that one small investment had all of a sudden 6 stages we were on across the venues and dinners as well and things like that. So it really helped us get creative about how we could do so much more with a very, very small budget.
I love that. I think it's so applicable for everybody in the sense that like everybody has some form of partnership that they engage in, right? So however you're running events when you're asked to do more with less, right? How do you look to your partners? How do you look to being able to partner, give to get type of scenario? That's great. Bethany, so you mentioned like ROI and maximizing ROI. And what I really love about you saying that is like when I hear do more with less, what I'm kind of hearing in general is like, how do we squeeze more juice out of this fruit? It's the same fruit, right? But like we're trying to get more out of it. And the goals really don't change. No one's like, hey, I've cut your budget, or hey, we don't have this resource this year, but by the way, you don't have to do as good of a job as you did last year. No one says that, right? Like no one's like, hey, your ankle sprained, but you don't have, you don't have to run the mile in 6 minutes. Like you still do. So that's what I love about that thought. You're getting creative to think, how do I get ROI and max out of this, to think that way? So tell me a little bit about your thought process and kind of how you approach that.
Yeah, I'll give an example too. So every year for the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, Sixth Sense has sponsored Forrester Summit. It used to be Serious Decisions. Now it's Forrester B2B Summit. And this year had a pretty significant cut in our budget, but our pipeline goal increased like it does every year. So we had to figure out, right, how do we change our strategy and really again like maximize our spend to drive that pipeline at the end of the day. So for years we used to host this big party. We used to buy out a bar on Rainy Street and it was super fun and line out the door.
Love Rainy Street.
Yeah, it was great.
Sorry, it's such a great street.
It is. But, we really weren't seeing ROI from it. And we were spending a ton of money. And we really don't need brand awareness anymore at that show. Like we're very well known. We host ancillary events and dinners. So it really wasn't doing anything for us. So this year we decided instead to spend half the money on a super targeted high touch VIP event. And again, get the right people in the room versus a lot of people in the room. So, we're trying really hard with a decrease in budget to again figure out how to increase ROI.
That's excellent. Couldn't you also argue that regardless of a budget cut, right, and ask of revenue that is higher than before, that may have been strategically the better route to go, and it just took something to making you think a certain way to make the change?
Totally. 1,000%. And I think that's like, we all do this, right? We go to an event and we go back year after year and we kind of do the same thing because we've done it before. But I think sometimes it does take, a decrease in budget or something else to prompt you to be creative and really think about, what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish.
It's definitely a catalyst for innovation. And I love what you shared, Bethany, about the strategy to do more curated, smaller. I think, I love Maya Angelou's quote of you might not remember what someone did, but you'll never forget how they made you feel. And, that's obvious for experiential. That's what we try to do, right? But I think we can get into here's how we go to an event, like into a pattern of doing the same things, especially when it's like, oh, we've got the money, so let's do that and let's make that happen. And this really is a time where it's like, how can I stand apart? How can I do something that someone's really going to remember, that they're really authentically going to feel connected, and how can we make people feel seen, heard, understood. And it's interesting that in this era of doing more with less, we also have more new disruptive technology like AI to help us do that. But it's also, that's a change agent too. So it's just a time when there's a lot of experimentation. And I just want to encourage, I mean, people, that's what we're doing too. You're not going to get it right every time, but it is the time, because there's so much churn and shift, to try new things. Like, for example, we went to Dreamforce like we always do, but we had a significant cut. And so we did some containers instead of a booth. We didn't even have a booth at Dreamforce. And it is a place where people expect to see certain things. And it was something unexpected from IBM to see that. So I think it's a time to try those things and see it as a positive, that take a smaller investment to incubate some more innovative things. Look at how AI can be a part of that to reach more. So there's some tools at our disposal as well that are less expensive, I think, at this time.
That's great. Can either of you give me anything that maybe you've worked on recently or that you're working on right now, right? Examples or specifics, like what are you trying to do more with less right now?
Yeah, I can go. So we're heading to Adobe Summit at the end of this month, and it's not a huge show for us. It's probably like tier 2, tier 3, right? We don't invest a ton, but we still want to make as big of an impact as we possibly can given our spend. So this year we're leaning into our own internal 6 Sense staff and figuring out how to drive a big social play, right? So getting all of our internal influencers to really like go hard on LinkedIn, invite people to our breakfast and our evening event and come visit us at our booth and all the things that we're doing there. And just, it's free, right? I mean, it's totally free. We're just going to
Yeah.
try to blast and blow up everyone's LinkedIn feed. But I think, again, that comes from not having a ton of additional money to spend. And again, to Erin's point, like how can we be creative and think outside of the box and still get that awareness that we're trying to drive towards?
Good example. Erin, what about you? You got anything you're working on right now? Doing more with less?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're doing a lot more internally with our creative folks and our marketing folks, where we are really trying to tie in more closely with our sales and account reps, and really focusing in on our existing clients and having them tell stories about us. And so that's, again, goes to the partnering. How can we provide some value to them in terms of an opportunity to speak or tell a story, and then have them tell the story about us? And this is all kind of a more pre-work to an event. I think that as the digital marketing shifts and as we're coming out and getting more in person, we're doing a lot more work ahead of time and
Mhm.
deepening those relationships, and also giving opportunity for the number of ways that we can have touch points with our clients. So, we have our Think flagship event that's coming up in May. And, some folks might not be able to come to that, or maybe we're recommending to them, before you come to Think, come to one of our innovation studios, attend a webinar. Like, we're getting smarter about not just targeting siloed or specific events, and really looking at the
Yeah.
journey and the relationship and the full funnel of how to have that stickiness and that continued, more authentic relationship, versus let's get you to this event. Let's
Mhm.
build and cultivate this relationship. And that could include coming to this event, coming to this meetup, and trying to what Bethany was sharing with the more curated or personalized meetups. Those things are really going to resonate with people as they get more and more opportunities to go to events now, as things are really opening up.
I love kind of how you're viewing that, right? From doing the work ahead of time, touch points, and thinking a little differently. It makes me think doing more with less. I was actually having a conversation this morning with a partner of ours, or hopefully soon to be partner of ours, that's over in Europe. And one of the things we were discussing is the sticker shock in pricing when they're brokering over to us with their clients, right? Because they want us to build and jump in and get in the middle for them, for their clients. And we got in this conversation. I said, hey, like, I think that should be such a trigger for either you or for us to open the conversation and say, hey, like, let's just say you didn't have to pay for the booth. Let's say I was Elon Musk, right? And we were going to build you this beautiful booth, whatever, and you didn't have to pay for it, right? What are you doing to make sure that you don't waste that booth and the opportunity that you're there? Like, let's shift the conversation that way, because there's a little bit of anxiety about the cost and things are happening. It's like the booth is not the problem solver. It's a piece of the problem solver. So it makes me think about like approach and the actions that you're taking ahead of time, and sort of the touch points that you're having. How are you making all this come together? It doesn't take less or more budget. It potentially just takes different line of thinking and the way that you're going into a trade show or going into an event.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
100%.
no, I was just gonna say like kind of what Erin was talking about. Like events really shouldn't be just like a point in time, right? Like
Yeah.
there should be kind of, they should be integrated, throughout your strategy. And that's again how you build relationships and create, lifetime customers, hopefully.
And if anything, because we know what in person, I've had relationships where when I was in consulting and standing up different divisions around the world, I'd have a 1 or 2 day meeting with a group in India, and all of a sudden we were working together like in a whole different way for years, off of a 1 day kind of connection. That's how powerful events are when we come together. So if you think about kind of some prep beforehand, and then you meet in person, it just really solidifies it. It gives a punch or a power to that in-person meeting. Now you can come completely cold to an event and make great connections and networking, yes, but I just couldn't agree more with what Bethany's saying. It's not just a point in time. And if we start looking at events as more along the continuum of our relationship with our clients, and even new, if we're just starting a relationship with them, one of the things that we've really tried to do is have a very specific journey that we want to take someone on at each event. And it changes depending on the event. We could be going to a third party sponsorship where we know we're going to see a lot of new clients, or we could be having our own proprietary event where we know it's mostly people who already know us, and we have those journeys really laid out. I want someone to do a demo, I want them to go through an activation, and I want to set up a follow-up with them here or separately. And those are the 3 things we tell everybody in the staff. This is what you got to do with every person who comes in here. Now, do we get that? Not necessarily. On a newer event, we absolutely want to have a follow-up with them, or we want to send them. So, really having a very specific intention behind how you're engaging with people. Some events are going to be those follow-up and emphasis on the engagement. Some of it's going to be new, but really doing that work ahead of time, it has really been key for us in seeing the greater ROI in performance on our events.
I think, don't wait until the event is over to think about what the follow-up from the event is. So like we were on a call today before this, a planning call, and we're already talking about our follow-up plan for an event that's like 2 months from now, right? And how are we going to kind of continue that conversation, and where are we going to drive people? What are the CTAs? And really trying to make that follow-up impactful and personalized versus just the kind of generic, thanks for attending, sorry we missed you kind of emails.
Love that. Few things you guys said there I think is just awesome, and I want to stop, pause, and make sure we talk about it. One, you mentioned that events are not a point in time. I love that, right? Erin, you doubled into that by talking about the journey, right? And then you also mentioned intention on engagement. This is something I want to just stop and talk about a little bit, because I'm such a believer. It's like the example I used with our European partner, right? Is essentially saying like the booth and being there, or the way you run the event is just one set in time thing. So much that goes on around it matters, I would argue, more than what actually physically is there and happening in that moment. So I would love to talk a little bit about, like, Bethany, how do you view when you're saying an event is not just a point in time? Just talk more on like how you view the before and the after, and what you mean by that.
Yeah. I mean, I think internal enablement is super important. And I think until I started at 6sense, I didn't really realize how important, but I would say like, you need to make sure that your internal teams are enabled and aware of what you're doing and helping you drive to your goals, right? So we start this months before we roll out, we launch an event, we do all this internal enablement, we do Slacks, we get on our all hands calls, and we're really making sure that everyone knows, for our tier one events, like not for every, but for our larger events, right? So I think it starts with that, while we're doing the planning, we're enabling our internal teams. And then, like I said, the on-site is great. Like we want the on-site to be super impactful. We want
Yeah.
people to remember, like we want to create amazing experiences. We want people to remember our events and want to come back, of course. And I think we want to build those relationships. Like we work really hard to drive meetings at our events. So every account that comes to our user conference has to have a meeting on site, right? That's with their CS leader, potentially an executive. So again, really making that on-site experience count. And then how do we follow up after? So again, we do a ton of internal work on this. We create templates and we really drive home the importance of the post-event, timely post-event follow-up. So again, ensuring that we're kind of, we're spending all this money on events, like let's make sure that we're driving business.
It looks like there's real emphasis and thought around the event is what you're saying, really. Like there's thought into, okay, this is what's happening there, but like A, how do we create that happening? And B, what do we do with that happening afterwards? Which I really like because I think it's so important. It's such a missing piece with, I would say, sort of either beginners or companies that don't do events as well as others, or some smaller companies that are just starting to navigate the waters and spending a lot of money at events is they get very fixated on the standard things that everybody knows. But where they're not getting fixated is on like, do you have like a guerrilla marketing approach when you're going to this event or not? Like how creative are you being? And how are you getting butts in the seats, right? How are you making sure that your touch points are not just a touch point just because they're there and they walk up and you do a demo in your booth, like that your touch points are meaningful. Erin, when you talk about journey, and I love what you said, intention of engagement, walk me through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of ways that I myself have found myself approaching things, and that I think event marketers approach things. I'm going to put on an event, or I'm going to achieve this many client interests, this many deals, this amount of pipeline, this, and when you look at it that way, you're really looking at how do I use an event as a tactic to achieve that? And it's one facet of my overall marketing plan. So, how do all of the other things that I'm doing factor into how I can use that moment in time to be a continuum on the journey and not just one thing? And so, I'll give another example. We had a get together at one of our telcos that we orchestrated, and we had several clients in the area, and this was in Dallas, and we've been really trying to make some progress in the area of promoting a certain product, a certain AI product. And, we said, look, we've been trying to get these people together. We know that each of these clients, there were 4 clients involved, just 4. There were 20
Mm-hmm.
people at this event, right? And we set up a day where this telco hosted and told their story of what they'd done with us. And it cost us about $500 for refreshments. They told a story. They went through their whole facility and basically told how we had done for them what we're trying to get done with these 4 deals. And one of those deals went through. So this was an event, but it was an event purely created for the purpose of progressing some of those pipeline deals. So that's just an example of how you can use events, whether it's I'm going to sponsor at Adobe Summit, or whether it's, hey, maybe I could use an event tactic to make this get across the finish line.
Mm.
So I think those are just some thoughts around what are you really intending to do with this event? Just show up for awareness or specific things. And the more specific you get, and the more specific you get on the tactics there and how it fits into the bigger picture, the more successful you're going to be.
I like that. It ties into a question from Mark. Mark, thank you for the question. It says, how are you measuring ROI? Right. So before you both answer this, Mark, what I would say with this is I think ROO is as important as RO, maybe not as important, but it's such a large piece of it. ROI to me with events is tricky especially the bigger the company, the longer the sales cycle, the more complexity. It's not so simple, because I've had this conversation with a lot of people. It's not simple, but if you have to know the objectives of the event that drive the outcomes that you want, right? So then everything needs to be built around those objectives and the outcomes. And really what's trackable and what is measurable in the moment within 60, 90 days, sometimes 30 or 20 days after, is, did we hit ROO? Did we hit these objectives that will lead to being able to find out and figure out and go down the path of where the ROI is? And do you even have a chance of hitting ROI? So I'll let Bethany and Erin go, but I wanted to get that in there because I think it's important.
Yes, I love that, Matt. I think, again, really starting, like, the first thing you should be doing when you're thinking about an event, once you've secured budget and you've committed to going, is what are you trying to achieve there? Forget the metrics, like that will come, right? But what are you trying to achieve? Is it brand awareness? Is it thought leadership? Is it number of lead, right? Like what is it? And then really like back it out and develop your strategy to try to hit those larger objectives. And I think it is super important to have metrics around every event. I mean, our key metrics for really all of our events are source pipeline, influence pipeline, meetings booked. Again, we're super heavy on and that's more kind of meaningful conversations. We're not like, I don't set goals around number of booth scans anymore. Like, I don't really care how many people come to our booth and want a Stanley mug. That's great. But are we having those conversations? And is it an account that is worth us spending time post-event following up with? Because those are the people that we really care about. And that's where we should be kind of spending our time post-event.
And Bethany, I'll bet to a degree, based on meetings booked, based on source pipeline, based on qualified pipeline, like, on certain numbers and points and statistics of your business, when you hit certain numbers, like, is it 100 meetings booked for X or 50 for X? You guys know those numbers. So that's why, to me, those objectives are so important, because you have to be able to go get some formulation of those numbers. And then you can going backwards even further. You can benchmark into an event saying, like, is it even possible to get 100 meetings booked at what we're doing? Because for every 100 meetings, we develop 20 qualified pipe and 10 of those close. Like, so you work backwards from it.
Yeah. And
because the ROI takes so long. Yeah.
That's a great point. I mean, we work really closely with MOPS, like leading, before we're even launching internally, to figure out based on historical data, based on our segments, where the accounts fall, based on the accounts that we've seen attending these events before, right? So we're thoughtful about how we create those goals. So again, like, I think it's really important that we're not trying to set ourselves up for failure. We want to be successful, right? I'm not saying you should sandbag and, say one meeting booked, but be thoughtful about how you're thinking about those metrics. And we do set a baseline target, right? Like 10x ROI on our spend for sourced pipe is like really our kind of baseline. And if we're not hitting that, and we've gone to the same third-party event for 4 years, maybe we shouldn't be going to that event anymore, right?
Great
and
question.
So really, like, I have a whole spreadsheet that every quarter for our QBRs, we go in and we track and we continuously update, because to your point, sales cycles are long.
Yeah.
And so you can't necessarily tell 30 days post-event how successful the event was.
Yeah. Erin, what about you? What have you done from an ROI perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I really love what you said about ROO, because it really is the qualitative and the quantitative, and so many things, agree with so many things that Bethany shared. We're very fortunate that we've had a CMO from the last 6 or 7 years that's really invested in a multi-touch attribution system that really helps us look at full funnel, where we're touching from our web presence, our digital presence, our social media, all of those aspects, as well as our events. So we do look at scans. We all say, honestly, we all say as event marketers, oh, it's not just the scans, but we always have to look at the scans. I mean, it is, Bethany's laughing. I mean, it's like, everyone goes, it's not just the scans, but what are the scans? But so we do look at the scans, because that gives us attendance. We also look at, and what you're saying is true, Matt, like, to some degree, you do know if you have this number of meetings, it has some correlation, but we continue to look at that. We continue to look at how that works. And again, it's the type of event. So just in summary, I would say what Bethany was saying is crucial. Is this a brand awareness event? Is it a demand gen event? What is the intention behind the event? If it's a demand gen event, then it really is all about the client signals, the client interests. We use a number of different tools around registration and Salesforce and what have you to culminate and pull all of that information together, and take a look at how the event performed. We also look at the earned media and the social impact from an awareness standpoint. So we look at the individual client pipeline, all those measures, as well as what is it doing for us in market to get us in front of new customers, especially in the area of AI. There is a technical community that we don't necessarily touch at our more traditional events. We do have tech exchange events, but there's a community and an idea of who's leading the AI race that's really important. And so that goes to the ROO that you're talking about. And that can be measured with some social media and impression, but it also is, some more intangible measures. So
Gotcha. Good stuff.
hopefully that helps. Yeah.
No, it's great. Bethany, Erin, what's like your last do more with less breakthrough, right? What's something that's like tangible that happened that you saw, you either tracked, you executed on? I would love to hear that.
Well, this has not yet happened, and this is the example that I used earlier, but we've set a goal and we'll know in a couple months how it goes. But we're trying to drive a 15% increase in pipeline while operating with a 15% decrease in budget. So
Okay.
I don't know. We'll see how it goes. It's our first big event of the year. So
I love that.
It's going to be a challenge, but.
All right. So you're saying 15% decrease in budget, right, for the event, but a 15% increase in pipeline, you said?
Correct.
That I don't want to make it sound not that bad, right? Because I think from your side, it's probably difficult, but that sounds to me like it's not crazy. It's not like insane. Like that sounds like something you could think through, or you could at least say, okay, like let me wrap my mind around this and come up with ideas. If it was like 50 and 50, or like a 30% budget cut with a 40% increase in pipeline, you might be like, I mean, where do I even start? Right. But 15 and 15,
I think
I don't
it's
know.
doable.
I feel like, I do too.
Yeah.
I mean, a challenge, but doable.
For sure. And again, I think it's thinking creatively, thinking out of the box, being innovative, and you'll get there, right?
Yeah.
But trying to set ourselves up for success and thinking about strategically how we're going to make that happen, and not impact our customer experience. It's hard. It's challenging.
Mark said on this, he has another question. He said, who on your team does the measurement from all those sources? And he said, go Bucks, Bethany. I think he sees the Michigan thing.
It's Michigan, Mark.
Answer, but I can say for us, we have an analytics team within our marketing department that handles that. And each of whether it be the web team or the event team or the campaigns team, we're all responsible for making sure that we're using the tools and uploading the information. And then we have a team that works on and we have some dashboards that are pretty amazing, where we can see exactly for a particular event, a particular campaign, what the return was and all of that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, but I think having internal support from a metrics perspective is really important, right? Like we have an amazing ops team. We have dashboards that we're constantly trying to improve and just make sure that, we put them out internally and that they help us measure and ideally hit our goals at the end of the day.
I think too that another metric that's helpful from events, not only to the bottom line, is using beacons. We understand where people dwell, where they spend their time. And that really helps us in terms of cultivating the next engagement and what is worth investing the budget or lack thereof. For example, you could spend an inordinate amount of money on an experience and you don't have people stay long. And you may have scans, but they don't stay long. But then you have a reception where you're really cultivating, matching up different roles on different topics, and they stay for 4 or 5 hours. And it's like, oh, wow, this tactic worked really well. So, the behavioral metrics are really interesting and key, not always accessible, but when we have that kind of information, it really does help us in terms of the next strategy and what works.
I find just more information, the better, right? I think bigger companies have more access to information, but for smaller companies, sometimes you have to create your own. You have to dig and do
Yeah,
as
and
much as you can
sometimes
to
third
build it on.
parties that
Yep.
you sponsor with will provide you
Yep.
that
We'll have
information,
it. It's a
you
great
know.
point. We have another question. We have a question from Jesse. Jesse, thanks for the question. It says, when trying to build brand or product service awareness through a new event, what are some of the best practices that you suggest? And Jesse clarified, saying, to clarify, through creation of your own, a new event. So when you're trying to build brand or product service awareness through a new event that you are creating, what are some of the best practices?
I would say wherever you can involve someone who has a voice in the audience that you're trying to reach.
Mm,
That's really key because, especially if it's a new event. So wherever you can create buzz about that, and it could be a podcast. Doesn't have to be you get them there. It can
yeah.
be someone advocating for you, but different pathways into getting the word out with the audience you're trying to reach is key.
Jesse, when I read that question, I think like the first thing that comes to my mind of hosting your own event to build brand awareness, product service, and bringing people in for that is like narrative, right? And is kind of, what is the story? What is the narrative? Like, what is this narrative that you want people? Well, two pieces. Sorry. One is like narrative, and one is like what Erin mentioned earlier about what are they going to feel? What's the emotion? How are you going to make them feel? So, those two things to me, I think you can reverse engineer. You should know what the narrative and what it is you want them to know, because you're saying you're trying to build brand awareness around a product or service. So what do you want them to know? Right? It can't just be that they know your product. People want to remember a story. People want to feel a certain way. So that's something that I would be thinking about, is what is that at the event?
Yeah, I agree. I'll just give a quick example. We have an internal evangelist that sits within marketing, and he has created two different dinner series. And one is specifically targeted toward net new business, right? People that really don't know Sixth Sense. And we call it the Six Sensory Supper. So it's really takes you through these six senses in like super cool and unique ways. Like there's fire and there's black lights and all these like crazy things, right? And it is an experience. And people walk away from that dinner just being like mind blown, right? Like just a
Mhm.
really cool way to bring the brand to life and have people learn about, the fundamentals of Sixth Sense. So I think finding like cool, creative, and innovative ways to get your brand into the market is, I mean, again, it's not easy to do, but pull it off, it really is impactful.
I love that, Bethany, because, again, getting back to the way you make someone feel, I mean, people are always looking for fun, new experiences, especially as we're coming out and everybody's like out and about and doing things. Like, what is going to stick in someone's mind is memorable. And I work for a very traditional company, and often, the thought of, well, that's just a little gimmicky, or maybe that's opportunistic. Take the opportunity. I mean,
Yeah.
a dinner with fire, if that's what it takes to get somebody to come and wow, that sounds like a cool experience. And then you basically have the door open and can have the conversation. And great things can happen from that. I think that that is really underestimated in our business, especially business to business events. I really do, because I've seen a gumball machine in a booth have better traction and better traffic than a $500,000 activation we created with technology.
Oh, that says a lot. I don't have to say any more on that.
I mean, it was a big, beautiful gumball
Yeah.
machine, but I mean, it was, really seriously, I'm not lying. We saw great return on that. And then like this exercise machine that everybody was competing against,
Mm,
each other to try to see who could do the best. And it was a very loose, association to the US Open and stats and things like that. And people were really surprised that it was very
good.
successful. And so that's where the innovation and what you're really how you're trying to get people to remember you is so
Mm,
important.
yeah. Jesse, the other thing it makes me feel is I know some companies and people I've talked to, I think they do a really good job of being empathetic to their customer. And I think empathy, sometimes the word's not used properly, but it's basically really understanding deep down what their customer is feeling, right? It's like, yeah, like they see their customer. I had a guy who came to us at Exhibitor Live. He hosted an event with us. He was a speaker. His name is Andrew Smallwood. And his company, I just love the way he flipped the empathy part. His customer is property managers, right? Property managers don't have a great rap. No one's like stoked to talk to their property manager, right? In a sense, they kind of get treated like shit. You know what I mean? So Andrew doubles and triples down on understanding that they feel that way. And when he goes to his third party conference and he's there to compete for their attention, he is treating them like ultimate VIPs, doing crazy above over the top style things, including picking them up in Ferraris at the airport, like doing this over the top VIP, making them feel amazing because he understands the way that they feel. So I think empathy with your customer, trying to understand how they feel in relation to the problem that you solve for them, can really help you build out a host event as well. All right. We want to ask a question about like kind of applying this doing more with less inside of a trade show booth, right? Because sometimes budgets get cut. And I think, Erin, you kind of alluded to it before with the gumball, with an activation inside of a booth. What has been an approach for either of you when you are trying to do more with less at a trade show, inside your trade show booth? What's your thinking like? Are there any examples that you have?
One of the things, when we started with this, you'd think after years and years of doing these events, and I'm guilty of it, that we would have had, this is exactly what we want for every person who comes in. We want to do a demo, an activation, and an in-person meeting, right? But we didn't have that until last fall. And so this was something that came up maybe a week before we were at the event. So there's not much more we could do to try to kind of amp up what we're doing. So we had two little tables and brought in some of the account reps who are very familiar with the client challenges and things like that. And we had them greet them at the booth and really proactively start a conversation. I mean, this sounds like we've all been at events, right? And you walk around and sometimes you see people over here on their phone and, and you'd think everybody's really, hey, how's it going? And greeting people. But these people, their only job was to greet people and say, how you doing today? Oh, you enjoying the conference? What's it? The personality to do that. And I'm telling you, we had twice as many people come through, scan into our booth, just by having two people that was the only job they had was to greet them, be a concierge. There's so many other things you can do to get attention in a booth. But I mean, I myself was kind of shocked when we did that to see the impact that it had. And it goes back to people want to connect, people want to be seen, people want to be treated like a special, as if, you really see where they, once you get to know them, you can take them through. And we really basically had hosts, if you will, for our booth. That's all they did. And it doubled our performance on that booth. There are other innovative things you can do to get attention, but I think that really blew my mind that it had that much of an impact.
I think it's amazing when you have an ambassador like that or somebody that's able to be out front and just be personable and not be salesy and just, you know what I mean? Have, like, I know when we've attended trade shows, my sales team and I, we've talked about like, how are you opening conversations? Be prepared. We had preparation because it's not everybody's great socially all the time. You're just not on. Like the only person I've ever met that's like that is Pablo. Pablo's incredible all the time with people. He just walk up, talk to anybody. You can't get a coffee without him having a conversation with somebody. But like, you can't be on all the time. So like for us, the trade show, we were like, man, we really do want to make authentic connections with people. We don't want to be pulling people out of the aisles to have a conversation. But what's up our sleeve? What's that conversation? How can we get them to open up? How can we get them to be comfortable and ask but also kind of surprise a little bit with a question where they're like, oh yeah, no, that's a great question. No, this is what, and just get past the pleasantries. You know what I mean? Because I think people appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's almost as important as having the experts on what it is you're selling.
I think that's a great point, and I couldn't agree more. What do you two think about like the difference between activating at a third party conference and a trade show booth versus a host event? I think there's a lot of conversation around that. More people are going to having host events. I see tremendous value in both. hosting your own event and going to third party, of course, with the right knowing why you're doing it, knowing who's there. Like, not every third party event is good for you to exhibit and sponsor. But what are your thoughts on balancing those two, understanding ROI, what you're trying to gain from them? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I can take this one. I mean, I think events don't have a one size fits all approach. I
Mm-mm.
think you need to think
Yeah.
about your strategy holistically and figure out, right, you have X number of dollars for the year, and how are you going to invest those in, percentage wise in your own proprietary events and third party hosted events. Obviously have more control when it's your own event, right? You control the invite list, who's there, are they the right people, right? You have way more control over that. And so again, I think when you go to a third party event, and someone asked this question on kind of evaluating third party events, I think you just need to be really careful when you're investing in a third party event, right? You need to be looking at the lists, and if you need to ask the organizer for all past lists, right? Go through the list, try to match, take the data that you're getting and do like a cross check with your, with Salesforce or your CRM. Are they your ICP, right? Are these your ICP? Are these target accounts that you want to be hitting, right? Like, what percentage in each segment? Be really thoughtful about how you're choosing and investing in those third party events, because they can be really successful, I think, with the right strategy,
Yeah.
as long as you kind of know what you're getting into.
You know what's interesting about what you said, Bethany? I think when it comes to kind of the people that are at third party conferences, I've learned just in this last, I don't know, 18 months or so, from talking to our customers and having conversations on this podcast about people's ICP and about who's at the event. Not only do you need to know who's at the event, you really need to understand what they are doing there. It's not that they're just there and you're just going to go. It's what are they there for, right? We had one company we were working with where essentially we were talking to them. We were trying to walk them through, their customers, what they want to do with them on the floor, what they're trying to achieve. This is before we even get to booth design. We're having this whole conversation about the strategy and the approach. And what we learned from talking to them, and I don't even know if they knew it, it was like this aha, all of us on a call. We're like, oh shit, that's amazing. We didn't, you know what I mean? And it was about this idea that like their real decision maker is this executive. The executive is in town for the event, but they're not on the show floor. They have engineers that are underneath those executives that are on the show floor, and they are the ones that are there. So then it becomes, okay, now we completely change what we did. So it was the strategy on the floor became this based on those engineers, based on the relationships they have with them and the value that they need, versus what they did off the floor was different because the decision makers and getting to them. So I would just encourage people, with what Bethany said is so spot on. Like, you got to get data to understand who is there. And then it's your job to understand what are they doing there and where are they? Because they're not just going to line up. They're not just walking around looking for you, unfortunately.
And maybe even orchestrate it. One of the things we're
Yeah.
doing at
Oh,
our
yeah.
flagship event, Think, is we have a plan for the executives to have peer time together, address really high level topics, and then we're taking their teams through and recommending their journey be on the forum floor and through all of the solutions. And then we create a reception for them to come together
Mm.
and share those
Yeah.
things with the account reps. So
I
it's
love that.
really being intentional about the journey, again, going back to that. What is the journey? How does this event fit into the spectrum of what you're doing with that customer and courting that customer across the full funnel of touch points? And then what is that journey specifically you want to at least recommend that they do when they're there so you can get the most out of it?
I love on that piece how you're kind of making that happen. I think that's really cool. Like, you're kind of interjecting in a way, and you're shepherding it along, I guess the way you would describe it.
Right. And you're not saying you have to do this, but hey, here's a journey. I mean, everybody tries to figure out, you go to an event and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? There's like a million things I could do. And
Hmm.
so we're trying to say, hey, here's what we think is a great journey. We'll walk with you through that. You have your rep, here's your team,
Yeah.
and so it at least gives them a place to start, and hopefully they'll follow that and it'll work in our favor.
Yeah, I agree. All right, we're getting close up on the hour here, so I want to be always try to be mindful, respectful of everybody's time, because I think it's just great that people show up for an hour here, right? And sit and listen. Erin, you are teaching a class at EMS. For those of you who don't know, it's Event Marketer Summit. I don't know if anybody's going to be there, but Erin will be there. She's teaching a class. What's your class? Master class on AI?
Masterclass on AI and experiential at events. Yeah. And it's actually on the Thursday, the 25th of April.
Fantastic. So if anybody is going to be at EMS, Erin is active on LinkedIn. I know Ish and Cody will put both Bethany and Erin's LinkedIn into the chat. Look her up, hit her up, go to the class, go say hello, go tell her that you are saw her on Event Marketing Redefined. Give us a little shout. Mark just wrote, "This was the best webinar I've attended. Thanks. Wish I had this for my last interview." Mark, we're flattered. We're blushing over here. Thank you. And we're glad. I think, one of our goals of the show is to make sure that we are driving strategy, tactics, ideas, getting people thinking and making it like applicable for people to take into whatever it is that they're doing inside of events. So Erin, Bethany, you guys are fantastic. It is awesome to sit here and talk with you again. Thank you both for taking an hour. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for hopping on the live show. I had a ton of fun. And thank you everybody for showing up. This was great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Awesome. We'll see everybody later, everybody. Thank you so much.